Hello, welcome to a misty, somewhat muggy August morning here in Greenwich Park. We're back on the Prime Meridian, that imaginary line of longitude that slices its way through southeast London and the Royal Observatory just here. Now, we were here last October to see how far we could get by land public transport in 24 hours from that line. We went east because that's the way that there's a lot more land. So we ended up in the eastern suburbs of Warsaw. Now, there's an obvious follow-up, isn't there? How far can you get going west? Well, the obvious answer is not quite as far because the land runs out. But I think we can get a decent distance. So at 10:30, myself and Mr. Turtle are going to hop on the bike that we've got waiting for us over there, head down to the nearest station and make our way off west to see just how far we can get. Do join us. Since we were last here, there's been some solid work to return Greenwich Park to its original 17th century French-inspired design, including giant grass steps leading to the observatory. Maybe this is some recompense for Greenwich defeating Paris in the fight for the Prime Meridian, but given the whole scene is overlooked by the tricorn statue of locally buried General James Wolfe, most famous for being killed while nabbing Quebec off the French, this may not be the most entente cordiale of spots. Well, it's 10:30 AM. Time to head west, though, spoiler alert, we aren't going to make it to Quebec today. As we pedal out of the park, the masts of the restored and firmly grounded tea-clipper Cutty Sark poke up above the Greenwich chimney pots, surely the only three-masted ship ever to be named after an item of underwear. And she's a good land-bound landmark for us. Today we're not heading for Greenwich's main station, but to the underground Cutty Sark halt on the Docklands Light Railway. There's a rumour the escalator will be fixed one day, but for now it's a twisting race down an awful lot of steps. Nevertheless, we've timed it well. Here's our automated train, too long for the platform at this dinky legacy subterranean station, and we're off on our roller coaster ride under the Thames and towards those Docklands skyscrapers we could barely perceive through the murk from the observatory. It may be over 37 years old, but for me, the Docklands Light Railway will always be the robot sky train from the future, and I strongly believe TfL should rename it as that. Mrs. Turtle, who is more used to the front seats of double-decker buses, is more dubious of this experience. We squeal around the 90-degree turns and over the viaducts through this island of dog-eat-dog finance, hijack half of a 19th century viaduct for a straight shot west, before bowering down again onto the city, Docklands' older twin, curving an underground course around the Bank of England's vaults. The first rule you learn as a Londoner is never change at bank. Nearly every big city has one of those. It's Châtelet-Les-Halles or Times Square 42nd Street. But this decade, many millions has been spent to upend that rule, so at least changing from the DLR to the Northern Line is now just one short escalator leap, not an endless trudge of the living dead through white-panelled passageways. So, despite the Northern Line's lengthy meander via the little hilltop village of Islington, this is now the speediest way from Greenwich to London's northern termini. And while St Pancras may be almost the spiritual home of this channel, that's not where we're headed today. We're going one stop further. At blocky, blank-visaged Euston, half shrouded in hoardings for a high-speed railway that may never get here, the electronic boards announce that our train is preparing. Nearly every other train says likewise, and the crowds of late-morning travellers mill aimlessly inside and outside the station hall. I will lurk at the end of platform 1, pretending that in these days of open data I don't already know that which of the multitude of Pendolinos, or perhaps Pendolini, will form my service northwest. Many of you will have guessed I'm heading for a ferry, and in a sensible world there'd be a direct boat train on the departure board, given this is the most time-effective crossing of the day. Unfortunately not. It's one or two changes of train to get to the port at this time of morning, so I'm waiting to board a Manchester-bound express. There's a certain amount of manana-esque wandering around by the train crew, then eventually the screens light up to confirm this is indeed the 11:33 to Piccadilly, and we are admitted to the Stygian depths of Euston's platforms. It may have looked a bit leisurely on the part of the train crew, but our Pendolino is ready to start on the dot of 11:33. But the starter signal stubbornly sticks at red. Stationary minutes tick far too quickly by for a mind to focus on a 13-minute connection at Crewe. A lowly Lioness Line London Overground train has failed in the station throat, blocking in numerous impatient expresses. Eventually, it limps out of the way and we are the first to get the green light, 17 minutes late, but coursing effortlessly, electrically up the Camden Bank, a gradient so steep that when Euston was first built, trains had to be winched up it, the weak steam locomotives attached at the top. The train manager assures us, as we sweep through Grey, Willesden, Wembley and Watford, that we will seek to make up some time en route. Around this point I get both good and bad news. I've been closely monitoring the ferries all morning as there's some distinctly un-Augusty weather in the Irish Sea today. So much so that the first return sailing of the day for the fast ferry I need to catch was cancelled thanks to wave height. But she's now departed Ireland on her second sailing, raising hopes that she'll make the return trip. However, I've also had an email which cuts, very slightly, how far west I can get. More on that later. Swiftly, we are past the M25 and into the golden harvest time countryside. In the front carriage we get the first lurch of the train's tilt as it enters the sharp bend at Berkhamsted, sweeping past the moated castle remains where in 1066 the Saxon lords surrendered to William of Normandy after he completed his flanking move around London. It's remarkable how quickly from the capital you're into lonely empty lands, ideal locations for sticking a glove and a torch in a signal, stopping the postal express and robbing it of sacks of used banknotes, as they did in 1963. Railway, motorway and canal squeezed together through a narrow break in the low hills at Watford Gap, named after the small Northamptonshire village of that name, not the large town passed some 30 minutes ago. This is not, contrary to popular belief, where the north begins. I always had that point as being somewhere around Rugeley, where what is now a lovely run beside the Trent was, not that long ago, overshadowed by the huge cooling towers of the town's coal-fired power station. Sic gloria transit mundi, but for good reasons. When things are running well, the West Coast Main Line timetable is a work of genius, with semi-fast trains ducking out of the way of flighted expresses onto the slow lines at the last moment. Long, slow freights somehow squeezed in among it all. Today, we're doing one better. Having been the first train released from Euston, there's nothing in front of us and the clear signals stretch ahead for miles. Slowly, minutes are being clawed back, but not very many. I'm going to need that Crewe connection to be held, or for the backup plan not to have also succumbed to Euston's chaos. "125 miles of non-stop speed from Euston comes to an end as we slip gently into Stafford's glorious, or dismal, depending on your preference, brutalist station. Beyond, we streak through the contented countryside of the Staffordshire-Cheshire borderlands, all plump cows and horses in pink blankets. We're now estimated to arrive at Crewe at exactly the same time the connection should leave. I position myself by the best placed door to quickly get to the north-facing bay platform, but the inevitable brief stop at a signal just outside Crewe puts paid to any hopes. Along with several other Chester-bound passengers, we alight to the site of an empty platform from which the 1321 has just departed. Fortunately, it seems the backup train has escaped Euston with minimal delay, and we have 20 minutes to enjoy the faded grandeur of Crewe station. Crewe was, of course, once all fields. There are a couple of early railways intersected here, a few miles from Crewe Hall, and a junction station was built. This turned out to be a handy place for the London and North Western Railway to build its steam locomotives, and the rest is history. There's so many crumbling arches, skeletal roofs and walls sprouting buddlier these days that I'm not sure the station even gets the faded grandeur description anymore. Parts of the station have the air more of a monastery after Henry VIII had his way with them. The train for the short hop to Chester glides gently in, just a couple of minutes late. This is one of Avanti's new bi-mode trains, and as I step aboard, the diesel engines under the floor rumble into life for the unelectrified leg to Chester. Now, I could have got this train direct from Euston. The reason I didn't is that its recent track record has been a mixture of heavy delays or curtailments at Crewe, often missing the vital connection into Wales. I didn't trust it. Thankfully, today it's come to my aid. We skim over the fertile Cheshire Plain past villages with deep English names like Aston juxta Mondrum. Crossing the Shropshire Union Canal, I'm reminded of badly navigating a narrowboat onto this bridge 5 years or so ago. I don't think I did lasting damage to either the bridge or the boat. Unmissable among the green fields is the red sandstone crag on which the scant remains of the 13th century Beeston Castle stand romantically. The railway's pretty archaic around here too. Our 125-mile-an-hour capable super train is drifting along under semaphore signals, its passage offered by bells from one signal box to the next.
All arrivals to Chester, please do check the information boards as these trains.
Chester Station feels like a junior sibling of Crewe. Still a major hub with lines fanning out in 6 directions, but crumbling, largely roofless and pigeon-haunted, architectural remnants of a former cohesive whole that are left in Ozymandian decontextualised isolation. Passing the plaque advertising the appropriately Greenwich origin of many of the station's stones, I join the suitcase rumbling stampede over the bridge for the North Wales Coast train. It growls in, deeply unresplendent in Transport for Wales's grumpy livery, and there's at least limited relief that they found a free car unit to run this busy summer seaside train today, when it can so often be just 2. A few minutes out of Chester, unseen, we cross the border into Wales, near where it divides Chester Football Club's pitch and car park into different countries. This train is a Trans-Wales Express from Cardiff, and on its journey to Holyhead, it crosses the border no fewer than 8 times. This is the final one. From here it's due west, deeper into Wales. I can't make this journey from Euston to northwest Wales without playing John Betjeman's poem A Ballad of the Investiture in my head as it describes our route. Commissioned by the chap who is now king, it recounts Betjeman's journey to Carnarvon for Charles's investiture as Prince of Wales. Spring frocks, silk hats at morning's prime, one of a varied congregation, I glided out at breakfast time with Euston's Earl from Euston Station, through Willesden's bleak industrial parts, through Watford onto leafy Herts, bound for a single destination. Warwicks and Staffs were soaked in rain, so was the open Cheshire Plain. The railway crossed the River Dee, where Mary called the cattle home. The wide marsh widened into sea, the wide sea whitened into foam. The green Welsh hills came steeply down to many a Cara-circled town. Prestatyn, Rhyl, till here were we, as mountains rose on either hand, awed strangers in a foreign land. That last line about a foreign land feels rather politically daring for a poet laureate, given the rising Welsh nationalist sentiment at the time, rejecting Charles as a foreign prince. Almost the entire run from Prestatyn to Rhyl today is along the back of an impressively long row of identical bungalows. Continuing that theme of fuzzy identity, flags in the back gardens proclaim loyalty variously to Wales, England, the United Kingdom, and the Confederate States of America. The North Wales coastline equivalent of passing Durham Cathedral is the moment just beyond Llandudno Junction, where the train curves round Conwy Bay, through the momentary darkness of Robert Stevenson's tubular bridge, punches through the town walls of the smallest of Betjeman's Cara-circled towns, and sweeps below the forbidding ramparts of Edward I's Conwy Castle. Every traveller, however jaded, looks up from their books and phones in mild awe. Beyond Conwy's walls comes a long haul along the sea wall under lowering skies, the low coast of Ynys Mon and the hump of Puffin Island appearing on the horizon. The train lost its holidaymakers at Rhyl and Colwyn Bay and the students at Bangor. Beyond this isolated university city, we're just an intrepid few heading for the islands, and indeed Ireland. Long distance express we may be, but this is now also the school train to the Euston villages. Or it would be if it wasn't August. The guard walks through with a scrap of paper, noting any takers for the string of request stops. We should probably be counterintuitively grateful to the 1970s schoolboys who, exploring Robert Stephenson's Britannia tubular bridge with flaming torches, burnt it down. The non-tubular rebuild means we get a glimpse of the gorgeous Menai Straits separating Euston from the mainland, and of the ceremonial lion statue at the end. The first request, and indeed requested, stop on the island is Llanfairpwll, or Llanfairpwll Gwyngyll, or a ludicrous Victorian crowd-pulling 51-letter-long confection I'm not going to pretend to be able to say. It worked though. Coach parties still stop here to take photos of ordinary trains at an ordinary station, and to buy woollens.
Croeso ar drên Trafnidiaeth Cymru. Byddwn yn teithio I Caergybi.
We rumble through the grey afternoon across the marshy, eerie, slightly otherworldly interior of Euston, disturbing the odd egret dining at the muddy water edges, halting briefly at most of the isolated, untouched-looking request halts. This is both the once strategically vital postal and military main line to Ireland and a rural railway serving sparse settlements. The few low trees bend against the strong westerly wind which sweeps in unhindered across the flat plains. Almost unnoticed, squeezed between two main roads, we cross the Stanley embankment to reach the second island, Holy Island or Euston, and a few minutes later the train brakes, past rusty, empty sidings, to come to a halt at the buffer stops, dwarfed under the gracefully curved roof of the end of the line. This is Caergybi, or Holyhead. Any historical narrative of the road to Irish independence includes numerous journeys through this station, clandestine or open, daring escapes from British jails or fateful trips to and from Downing Street negotiations. That history still steeps through a bit in the historical heart of Holyhead Station, though back then the night steamer from Dunleary would have tied up in this basin here, right next to the platforms in the Euston Express. Now, with the main ferry business being shipping cars and lorries across the narrow sea, the vehicle carrying Leviathans docks some distance away on artificial Salt Island, but at least the foot passenger terminal at Caergybi is still right next to the train. I join a decent number of Sail Rail passengers waiting to check in, clutching our bargain through tickets and our passports that we definitely don't need to cross this invisible border, but which somehow always end up being checked. Any residual boat train romance quickly dies as we wait in a bleak corrugated iron barn for the buses that will take us to the ship. A few of us mooch outside in the light drizzle, watching the cars and coaches from Ireland appear from the distant dock. And then the buses arrive. They may have an anonymous white livery, but the interior notices and fonts give them away as Transport for London cast-offs. We are unceremoniously dumped at the end of the vehicle gangplank, and it's a short walk aboard the Dublin Swift, registered in Limassol, our fast catamaran across the Irish Sea. There was a time when catamaran ferries were the future, but their thirst for increasingly expensive fuel now makes them few and far between. On the Irish Sea, their inability to cope with much in the way of waves also became a handicap. The Swift is the last remaining UK to Ireland fast ferry, and she only runs in a short summer window. The Dublin Swift used to be a US Navy transport ship. She could take 153 Humvees. I suspect she's a little more luxurious in her refitted form. The inspired choice of name does deserve a little credit. She's the Swift ship to Dublin, but also references Dublin-born Jonathan Swift. Other key questions: are her passengers referred to as Swifties, and am I getting Swift-boated on my way to Kerry? No, not proud of those at all. The Swift arrived somewhat late from Dublin thanks to the weather, and we're clearly not going to make a timely departure as a result. 15 minutes after scheduled departure and Dutch coaches are still rolling into the hold. I suspect we're looking at another missed connection in Dublin, but happily that's also not fatal to the challenge. There's enough of backup. About 20 minutes late, the mighty jet propulsion engines roar into life. The vehicle ramp is winched up and we cast off. She's got some power, has the Swift, and we're soon clear of the shelter of the Holyhead breakwaters and out into a very wallowy Irish sea. Away to port, the conventional competition cruises in past Holyhead Mountain and South Stack Lighthouse. I suspect her passengers are getting a somewhat smoother ride in their vast seagoing mountain of steel. With the weather getting less and less hospitable and the catamaran really starting to feel quite small in this expanse of grey, I decide I've given Mrs. Turtle enough time to prove her sea flippers and head inside for dinner. Given the prices charged for a chilli and a cider, it was all the more important and satisfying to get them wholly unspilled to a table on our lurching, wallowing ship. I ascertained from the information desk that our reduced speed means we'll be about an hour late and settled down to watch President Macron watch France winning lots of Olympic swimming medals as the duty-free shop clinked in the background. But by the time we're in the western half of the Irish Sea, things have got remarkably calmer. We're speeding across barely rippled waters and are soon within sight of land. On the starboard side, we cruise past some of Ireland's most desirable homes spread out on the Ben of Howth. To port, range upon range of the Wicklow Mountains disappear into the evening light beneath sculptural clouds. You can tell we're nearly at port because they've just announced the gaming machines are being switched off. We're now safely within the walls of Dublin Harbour after a somewhat wallowy crossing of the Irish Sea, running basically almost an hour late as a result of bad weather in both directions on this return journey. Luckily, that doesn't change how far we can get west, it's going to change how we get there. So, got a long night ahead of us. As a foot passenger on nearly any ferry, you get used to a certain amount of milling around, waiting to be loaded or unloaded. If we were just a bit late, this would be annoying me, but with the train I'd hoped to catch at Dublin's Euston station, leaving from the other side of town in half an hour, that plan has well and truly sailed. Which just means you're spared the hilarious gone to both Euston and Euston stations in a day joke I had all planned out. Eventually, the nice Latvian crew member shepherds us down to the vehicle deck and another set of TfL cast-off buses for the short trip to the passenger terminal, where, for a second time, my passport is definitely not checked by a Garda officer to cross the invisible border. Seriously, I showed my passport less when I visited 11 European countries in 24 hours than I have today. With the Swift basking in the evening sunlight, her day's work done, I'm left to contemplate the empty stop where the bus to the city centre should have been, but which clearly didn't wait for the delayed sailing. Judging by the picture the bus operators used to illustrate the ferry link on their website, I assume they had to shoot off to meet a sailing across the Bosphorus. There's a few taxis, but a lengthy queue, and anyway, a taxi doesn't quite feel in the spirit of this challenge. So I'm off on a lovely walk through Dublin's very extensive docks, which I hope provides some return on a remarkable amount of very recent investment in pedestrian facilities along Docklands roads as I'm not sure anyone else has ever used. And what better way to admire the serried ranks of oil tanks than in the roseate hues of a Dublin dusk? The endless straight roads feel like they stretch on for kilometres, largely because they do. Eventually, doglegging onto Alexandra Road, things get a bit more interesting. The air is pungent with malt, there's a light ship rotting away on stilts, freight trains can run down the middle of the road, and in case there was any doubt as to where I've arrived, there's a statue of herself at the last road junction. Over 3 kilometres from the terminal and I've come to the point, it is literally called The Point, where the eastward march of Dublin's gentrification comes to a screeching halt at the edge of the dusty working docks. Just across the road from the final warehouses is the gleaming, no doubt tax-efficient headquarters of Yahoo. I had to check they were still a thing. We swapped container parks for squish apartments and concert arenas. Most importantly, because my feet need a break from the tarmac, the point is where the red line of the Luas tram network starts, and we're soon purring smoothly east, through a land of gleaming corporate headquarters, the heart of the erstwhile Celtic Tiger, through the nicely named Mayor Square, towards the city centre. After just a handful of minutes riding behind the tram driver, I'm back where I was in the freezing small hours on my Island 24 adventure a few months back, stately O'Connell Street, gulls swirling noisily around the flagpoles of the General Post Office as they look forward to a night feasting on the city's rubbish bags. It's good to be back in the beautiful and ugly, stylish and scruffy Irish capital, and with an hour or so to kill in eventide Dublin, there's time to replenish my supplies for the long night ahead, spend a few minutes communing with the Liffey swans, and, of course, take in a fortifying pint of the local dark stuff. literally local. It comes from just half a mile upriver in a rather stunning bar. It's come to something when I now consider a sub €7 pint of stout in a capital centre pub to be a bit of a bargain. Coming up to 11 PM and I'm back out by the Liffey, the city's sparkling lights glistening in the peat black water, the dome of the custom house gleaming silently and judgmentally towards the sea. Having missed the train, I'm going to be on the road for much of the night. Dublin has a perfectly good long distance bus station, but it seems to be almost wholly monopolised by nationalised Bus Éireann, leaving upstart private sector interlopers to juggle with some facility-less riverside stops along the Liffey. Bus Éireann go to bed early, but an outfit called either Dublin Coach or Big Green Bus, the names seem to be interchangeable, is happy to snap up the late night market from their stop outside a solicitor's office. There goes their 22:45 to Ennis, mine is the one in front. As he opens up the coach, the driver sticks on a fine, loud selection of tunes with a capital T. First up is Sweet Caroline, then Don't Stop Believin'. But contrary to the lyrics, we're not the midnight train going anywhere, we're the 23:15 coach to Tralee. Spot on time, our cross-country coach heads musically out along the Liffey, past the Halfpenny Bridge, past the Guinness Brewery, its wonderful musty smell pervading the vehicle, and yes, past Euston Station, from where the last long-distance train has long gone. So we did do Euston to Houston after all, one named for an Earl, the other for an Irish revolutionary. The soundtrack is now Country Roads. There will be country roads later, but taking us to East Kerry, not West Virginia. We pause at Red Cow Park and Ride at the end of the Luas tram line, which is not quite as bucolic as its name suggests, and here, luckily for those of us hoping for a doze, our drivers are swapped. Our new driver is less keen on the tunes, although we do learn, thanks to a well-dressed elderly gent who seems to hang out at the park and ride of an evening, making conversation with coach drivers, that he does like the music of Elvis Presley. In pleasant silence we plough onto the motorway into County Kildare, briefly dropping off some late-night commuters in its eponymous county town, where the horse-decorated roundabout hints at the nearby Curragh racecourse. I'm intrigued to learn, researching this journey, that the Curragh was accidentally bombed by the Luftwaffe in 1941, and that one SC-250 bomb remains unaccounted for. Careful out there, horses! Away from the cities, a midnight motorway in Ireland is a lonely experience. Little of the constant stream of HGVs I'm used to from similar journeys in mainland Europe. Mile upon mile of dark, the occasional toll plaza is an unworldly blaze of light, but there's no human contact. We pound through the dark of counties Laois, Offaly and Tipperary, from the old kingdom of Leinster to that of Munster, tipping us from the east of the island to its west. I briefly mistake a low light in the distant sky for dawn, except it's far too early and on the western horizon. It soon turns out to be the lights of Limerick seeping into the darkness ahead. After a brief, and at this time of night and year, wholly unnecessary diversion into the leafy campus of Limerick University, we arrive in Ireland's third city, along the quays of Abbey River, a loop of the Shannon that creates King's Island. The king in question was probably John, who built a big castle on it. Limerick is such a good defensive site that even Ptolemy was sticking it on his maps. Had I caught that train in Dublin, I'd have headed to Limerick via a change at remote Limerick Junction and immersed myself and Mrs. Turtle in the city's nightlife until this coach arrived at 2 AM. I do get a hint at that nightlife though, courtesy of the surprising number of passengers we pick up to head to Newcastle West, most of whom are engaged in a lively discussion as to which of them is Terry Wogan's biggest fan. Consensus settles that Katrina is. We're on to those promised country roads now. Adair, 5 minutes if you want to smoke, has a castle, Augustinian Priory, a Franciscan Abbey, and a Trinitarian Abbey, and it'll host the Ryder Cup in 2027. Not bad for a village of 1,000 people. Newcastle West, where we lose our Wogan fans, is doubly confusing. Firstly because it is, surprisingly, the county town of Limerick, and secondly because there is absolutely zero consensus between maps, signposts or websites as to whether it's 2 words or 1. Single brown sign marks our entry to County Kerry. With over 7 hours still to go, it feels early to be entering the final county of the journey, but it's a big county and things slow down a bit from here on in. It's 3:40 AM and the remaining passengers, who are both a small group but also a surprisingly large one for a time of the morning that shouldn't really exist, are dropped at the Tralee terminus. Given the town is synonymous with the ballad The Rose of Tralee, it's appropriate that we're greeted at the bus stop by a fine display of roses, courtesy of the Motor Taxation Office. The group of passengers soon disperses and the eternal question arises, what to do at 4 a.m. in Tralee? It's quiet, pretty and clean. The only sound is the clicking of numerous pedestrian crossings. Irish pedestrian crossings click very loudly, protecting me from precisely zero traffic. If you came with me on the Island 24 adventure, you'll be familiar with the 1949 Blue Guide to Ireland. I am, of course, travelling with it again. Interestingly, in its 75 years, no one has ever used it to visit Tralee, as the relevant pages were uncut. I've had to slice them open to learn that, thanks to its unhappy history, Tralee is quite devoid of any traces of antiquity, which seems a bit harsh. The unhappy history that's being alluded to here is that Tralee's own inhabitants purposely burnt their town down twice. First when the English approached, then again 48 years later when what the Blue Guide calls Williamites threatened. The Pikeman Memorial in the middle of the main street, which commemorates 4 local rebellions, was destroyed by the Black and Tans in 1939. As a town, it's now perhaps best known for the Rose of Tralee spin-off festival, basically a beauty pageant, but which now seeks to walk a tightrope of rewarding intellect and social responsibility. And today, the whole town is covered in County Kerry flags, as in 2 days' time, Kerry ladies' Gaelic football team will play in the All-Ireland final at Croke Park. They went on to steamroller Galway and win the cup. It's deserted at Tralee Casement Station, named for Roger Casement, Foreign Office civil servant, Easter Rising leader, shot for treason. No trains leave until 7 a.m. No buses depart from the adjacent bus station until 6. But at 5 o'clock, Eileen comes along and opens up her little coffee stall just outside, and I reckon she should be beatified. I'm always a bit nervous about being on the first bus of the morning anywhere, a recurring and never yet realised fear that the driver might sleep in. For want of any other passengers, I'm hanging out with the bus station's resident raven, strutting around like he owns the place, which he probably does. And I need not have worried. Moments before departure time, the first bus of the morning from Tralee swings in. I didn't expect such a grand double-decker on this rural route, apparently borrowed for the summer season to deal with the crowds travelling to Andangan or Dingle. Though it is just me on this positioning run. My Blue Guide tells me the motor bus takes 1.5 hours and doesn't run on Sundays. Now it takes 56 minutes, 7 days a week. See, things can get better. With the mountains of the Dingle Peninsula emerging from the dawn gloom, the empty bus speeds west along empty roads, squeezed between the River Lee and the parallel Tralee Ship Canal, built to bring trading ships closer to town, towards the monster-sized restored windmill at Blennerville. The grey pyramid of Binos Gwir, which translates as Peak Above the Winds, looms over Tralee Bay, and the 275 climbs valiantly to make our first crossing of the peninsula. The valley below is called Glen na Gaut, the Valley of the Madmen. The Blue Guide tells me it's because it's home to a well whose waters cure what it describes as mental infirmities. Somewhere around the crossing of this pass, we enter the Gaeltacht. The area is recognised by the government as being predominantly Irish-speaking. It's a pretty small sprinkling of pockets these days, almost wholly in the remotest spots of the west coast. In Anna's Cowell, we finally pick up another passenger. This remote peninsula village is the birthplace of Tom Crean, the Royal Navy seaman who survived both the Scott and Shackleton Antarctic expeditions and whose traces we came across previously on Island 24. It won't surprise anyone, this far west in Ireland, that it started to rain at this point. Now over on the convoluted south coast of the peninsula, we drop down towards the sheltered waters of Dingle Harbour, from where pilgrims left on boats en route to Santiago de Compostela, locals left on boats to go fishing, and most recently, tourists left on boats to see celebrity dolphin fungi. It certainly cannot be denied there is a strong smell of fish when you get off the 275 early in the morning at Andangan. It's bracing. Happily, because this is the far west of Ireland, it has now stopped raining again, so time for a quick stroll around this multicoloured tourist-centred village where the mythos of missing presumed dead fungi still lives strong. In a rather fun move, the roof of the bus shelter where you wait to go still further west is a namhog, the traditional boat of the Dingle Peninsula, made of tarred canvas stretched over a wooden lattice. Fun, but as its due time of 7:30 AM ticks past, I prefer a bus. Once again, my first bus of the morning phobia has got the better of me. A few minutes late, but here's the 277A. It's great to be back on Transport for Ireland's burgeoning local link rural network with their dinky, comfy buses and super friendly drivers. It's our final bus of the journey and we're heading deeper still into the western extremities of the Dingle Peninsula, the driver asking me if I don't mind him having the radio on as it's just me on board. Of course I don't mind. Some solid Handel concertos to waft us along to Fiantra, where we make a nifty 3-point turn in a handy campervan park, then across the peninsula on narrow lanes lined with a million wildflowers and dock leaves so large they could have been extras in Jurassic Park. Suddenly, beyond the straggling hamlet of Ballyferriter, we're on the exposed Atlantic-facing western end of the peninsula. A roaring, foam-flecked ocean on one side, heather-covered moors and dragon-toothed outcrops on the other. Once more, an Irish local link bus is taking me deep into some astonishing territory. It's 7 minutes past 8, and I've been deposited at the most westerly bus stop in Ireland, and, by some definitions, in Europe, at the Blasket Visitor Centre, just outside the village of Dunhuin, or Dunquin, at the far end of the Dingle Peninsula, just over 21.5 hours from the Prime Meridian. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'd hoped to get further west, but that an email had ended those hopes. Just offshore lies the depopulated Blasket Archipelago, and in summer, small boats ferry visitors out to Great Blasket Island. I was booked on the 0950 departure this morning, which would have got me there before the deadline, but the friendly person who manages the ferry emailed me yesterday to apologetically tell me that the Atlantic swells were too high to land on the island today and likely to be for the next 2 to 3 days. Here on the spot, I can see why. And it's appropriate really. Great Blasket was finally evacuated of its last residents in 1954, after it became clear the declining population could no longer be sustained through long periods of inaccessibility. So we're not getting any further west by public transport, but we have a good amount of time, shanked ponies at our disposal, and looming on the horizon is Dunmore Head, the most westerly point of mainland Ireland. We can get a bit further west yet. So off we trot, along the cliff tops, down fuchsia-lined lanes and over the brooks, the light changing its shapes and shadows on the Blasket Islands every few moments. We take a short but very steep diversion down the cliffs to catch a glimpse of the minuscule quay from where, had the weather been different, we'd have embarked for the island. Those rocks at the harbour entrance look terrifying, but this is what passes for a safe haven on this treacherous Atlantic coast. Despite, or perhaps because of their isolation, the Blaskets produced an incredible number of Irish language writers, recounting the hard, perilous, precarious life of the island's population. The most famous, Peg Sayers, is a cornerstone of the school curriculum, and mentioning her name to any Irish person seems to immediately bring back memories of very variable levels of affection of her work. But she is far from alone. Visiting the Blasket Centre later, the corridor of photographs and biographies of authors and storytellers from the archipelago stretches on and on. As I approach the path off to Dunmore Head, a sign tells me it was a location for the filming of The Last Jedi. I don't know about the Force, but I'm very glad to have a carrot cake flapjack I bought in Dublin last night with me. Now, I'm not much of an ornithologist, but I do know the red feet and bill of a chough when I see one. Ireland has about 900 breeding pairs, of which I saw no fewer than 3 this morning. On the windy, sheep-streamed heights of Dunmore Head stand two lonely historical remnants of very different moments in history. An inscribed megalithic Ogham stone, kindly stuck back sort of upright by enthusiastic amateurs in 1838, while beyond looms Spartan Lookout Post 38 from World War II, one of a chain of 83 built by the Free State government to observe military activity in their neutral waters. We edge a bit further west, downhill as far as we dare before reaching the sharp drop to the treacherous waters between Dunmore and the Blaskets that claimed two gold-laden Armada galleons in 1588. This is as far west as mainland Ireland gets, and it'd be hard to get much further west than this in Europe without taking to the skies. Good morning, it's 10:05. Here we are on Dunmore Head, 23 hours and 35 minutes after we left the Prime Meridian in Greenwich. We are at about 10 degrees 28 west of the Prime Meridian. Behind me is Great Blasket Island, where we hope to get, had the ferry not been cancelled due to the Atlantic swell. If we'd got there, that would have been about 10 degrees 31 west. So frankly, we did pretty much the entire journey. It's been an incredible amount of fun and interest. It's a little tiring overnight. This is very much the end of Europe. It's really the last substantial bit of landmass of Europe, most westerly point before you get to Newfoundland, if you don't count the Blasket Islands behind me, which are uninhabited, and you don't count the Azores and the Canaries and French Guiana, which I don't. So this really is pretty much as far west as you can get from Greenwich in 24 hours. So hope you've enjoyed coming along with us, and look forward to seeing you again on the next one with myself and Mrs. Turtle. Goodbye. So all that remains to do is extract myself from this astonishingly beautiful headland and wander along to the self-styled most westerly bar in Europe. Bizarrely, Kruger's Bar is where the campaign for real ale was founded. It's a friendly, cosy spot, though I can't say the real ale offerings are enormous, so presumably Canberra was founded in reaction to that rather than in celebration. But a red ale from Kilkenny slips down nicely with a restorative toasted sandwich and chips as I tot up the frankly astonishingly low cost of this journey, thanks to the bargain sail rail tickets, and ponder how much more direct a route it would have been if the Fishguard to Rosslare train and ferry timetables were a bit more user-friendly. And suitably fortified, we can head back out to enjoy a bit more of this primal, raw coastline. Thanks again for coming along, and we'll see you again soon.